All right, today we're diving into a really challenging idea from our source material, that the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't just in trouble. The argument is it's already dead. We're going to walk through the evidence presented in this analysis, from the political strategy it claims is responsible, all the way to the devastating human cost. So let's just jump right in with the quote that really sits at the heart of this whole analysis. The sources we're looking at anchor their entire argument on this statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They use it to frame his actions not as just reacting to events, but as a deliberate, decades-long political project. Okay, so before we go any further, let's get our bearings. This first part of the analysis is all about establishing what the two-state solution even was, and more importantly, why the source material claims it's just not on the table anymore. Right. Just so we're all starting from the same place, this was the big idea. For decades, this was basically the goal of international diplomacy. You know, the concept of two states for two peoples living side by side. It was the framework for everything. But here's where the analysis takes a sharp turn. The sources we're looking at use a really stark metaphor. They call this idea a corpse. They're essentially saying that because of the facts on the ground, the solution is no longer viable. And the argument is that while diplomats keep trying to revive it, they're basically ignoring that it's already gone. So the big question is, how did we get here? And according to this analysis, it was no accident. The argument is that the death of the two-state solution was actually the intended outcome of a very deliberate, carefully executed political strategy of not finding a resolution. And this is really the central argument of the whole thing. The source material says we need to look past the idea of a complicated conflict with no one to blame, and instead focus on what it calls a clear strategy from a specific political leader that actively blocked this diplomatic path forward. Okay, so why? What would be the motivation for a strategy like this? Well, the sources break it down into three main buckets. First, a deeply held ideological conviction about the land itself. Second, the cold, hard math of electoral politics, keeping a specific voter base happy. And third, framing any and all compromise as a massive security threat. And this right here is what the analysis calls the central and really tragic irony of the whole strategy. The public reason was always about achieving maximum security through total control, an iron wall. But the sources argued that this exact policy is what created the conditions for what they describe as the gravest security lapse in Israel's history. Okay, so that's the political strategy. But how does that actually change things on the ground? Well, this next section dives into how the map itself was redrawn, in ways that the sources claim make a viable, connected Palestinian state physically impossible to create. The first piece of physical evidence the sources point to is just the staggering scale of settlement expansion. Look at this number from the UN. Over 20,000 new housing units planned for East Jerusalem in a single year. That's used to show just how quickly this long-term trend has been accelerating. And this is so important to understand. The analysis makes it clear this isn't just about building houses. It's a deliberate three-step process. First, you place settlements in strategic locations. Then you build a whole infrastructure of roads to connect them, just for settlers. And the final step, that new network is used to chop up Palestinian land, making it incredibly hard for people to move around and live their lives. All right, we're now getting to what is, without a doubt, the most difficult part of this analysis, connecting this political strategy of non-resolution directly to its very real, very human, and very devastating consequences. So after looking at the politics and the maps, the analysis pivots to ask a very simple but devastating question. And the answer the sources give is, well, it's just a gut punch. According to the data they cite from the UN, this number, 18,430, represents the children reported killed in just under 2 years. And to give you some perspective on what that number means, when you look at the breakdown of all fatalities, you can see that children make up almost a third of that total. You put women and children together, and it's nearly half of all the lives reported lost. So here's the full data table from the sources. It lays out the numbers, showing a total of over 63,000 reported deaths. And it breaks them down, really highlighting the terrible toll on the people who are considered the most vulnerable in any conflict: children, women, and the elderly. But the sources are very clear that the cost isn't just measured in deaths, it's also about the suffering of those who survive. This quote, which comes from a UN report, is used to give a voice to the specific pain of the elderly.
who are dealing with displacement and the complete collapse of their support systems.
So, where does all of this leave us? The final part of the analysis tries to answer that, proposing a huge shift in how the world should even think about this conflict moving forward.
And their core recommendation is pretty radical. Basically, it's stop pretending. The analysis is urging the international community to completely abandon the two-state framework and instead deal with what it calls the one-state reality that already exists, a reality it defines by a single governing power and deep systemic inequality.
And so, we're going to end this explainer right where the source material leaves us, with this really tough, really uncomfortable question. Because if you accept the argument that the main framework for peace is gone for good, then you're forced to ask, what on earth could possibly come next? Thank you for joining us.